Top 10 actors who hated Chevy Chase the most. Chevy Chase was a comedy star, but behind all the laughs were fights, mean words, and broken friendships. These are the 10 people who hated him the most, and had good reasons to. He made America laugh. For many years. The quick jokes, the funny falls, the serious face that changed comedy and made Saturday Night Live super popular. Chevy Chase's comedy taught many actors who grew up watching his movies and dreaming of being like him until they actually met him. "There's a special kind of sadness," one old SNL actor said quietly, "when you find out your hero is actually the bad guy of the story." That sadness has been in the halls of 30 Rockefeller Plaza and many Hollywood movie sets for over 40 years. Chase left behind not just amazing comedy, but hurt feelings, broken friendships, and a reputation as maybe the hardest star to work with in an industry full of difficult stars. From SNL friends who saw him become famous to community actors who dealt with his angry later years, these are the 10 actors who found out the painful truth. Chevy Chase made people laugh until they had to work with him. Chevy Chase, the name, makes you think of famous comedies like Caddyshack, Fletch, and the vacation movies. His dry jokes and physical comedy made him one of the biggest stars of the 1970s and 80s. A talent so bright that even John Lennon was reportedly a fan who planned his week around watching Chase on SNL. But that amazing talent came with a dark side that got worse as his career went on. Behind the charming performer was a man described by co-workers as insecure, mean, and impossible to make happy. A star whose huge ego hid deep worries that he took out on people around him. The difference between Chevy's public image and his private behavior was shocking, said a longtime SNL writer. Audiences saw this charming, confident comedian. "We saw someone who could make a production assistant cry because his coffee wasn't the right temperature." That difference between the beloved star and the scary co-worker created a unique Hollywood situation. A comedian everyone agreed was brilliant who became equally known for being unbearable. Comedy is built on tension and release, on the careful balance between comfort and discomfort. For Chase, that line became increasingly blurred as his career went on. What started as edgy humor slowly turned into real meanness with co-workers rather than audiences as the targets of his sharp jokes. "There's funny, mean, and then there's mean," explained a director who worked with Chase in the 1990s. Chevy increasingly couldn't tell the difference. As we count down the 10 performers who experienced the worst of Chase's behavior, a pattern emerges of racism, sexism, and a basic insecurity that showed up as bullying. More troubling still is the timeline. From the 1970s to the 2010s, from SNL to Community, the stories stay disturbingly the same. While many difficult stars get nicer with age or learn from their mistakes, Chase seemed to get worse. His behavior getting nastier as his star power faded, creating a perfect storm that pushed away not just co-workers, but entire generations of comedians who once thought he was amazing. Let's begin our countdown of the 10 actors who got the worst of Chase's terrible behavior, and why their experiences show not just a difficult star, but a warning story about fame, power, and the dark side of making people laugh. "I'm sorry. Is something wrong, Will? You seem upset." "I'm okay. I don't want to talk about it." I've 10. Will Ferrell. When meeting your hero becomes a nightmare for Will Ferrell, Chevy Chase wasn't just a comedy legend. He was a plan to follow. Growing up in the 1970s and 80s, Ferrell studied Chase's performances, dreaming of one day following in his footsteps to SNL and beyond, when he finally made that dream come true, becoming an SNL star himself. The chance to work with Chase seemed like the perfect full-circle moment. Instead, it became what Ferrell would later describe as soul-sucking. The incident happened during Chase's 1997 return to host SNL, a homecoming that should have been great. Chase had been the show's first breakout star, the original Weekend Update anchor, who turned his one season on the show into Hollywood superstardom. For the current cast, especially Ferrell, who had grown up loving him, his return was highly anticipated. The reality proved devastating. Throughout the week, Chase put down writers, dismissed sketches, and treated the cast with contempt. For Ferrell, who had copied parts of his comedic approach from Chase's work, watching his hero behave with such disdain was more than disappointing. It was disillusioning. It was like watching your childhood dissolve in real time. A fellow cast member remembered Ferrell saying, "He wasn't just rude, he was cruel in ways that seemed designed to establish dominance." One incident in particular cemented Ferrell's disappointment. During a table read, Chase interrupted a sketch Ferrell had co-written, dismissing it as the kind of amateur garbage that's ruined this show. When Ferrell tried to explain the concept, Chase cut him off with, "I think I know comedy better than you, kid." We all just stared at our scripts in silence. No one knew what to say. Saturday Night Live writer. The room fell silent for Ferrell, who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most successful comedic actors. It was a life-changing moment, not just about Chase, but about the kind of star he himself would try not to become. Years later, when asked about Chase in an interview, Ferrell chose his words carefully. He was difficult. Let's just say meeting your heroes isn't always what you hope. But in private conversations with friends, he was more direct, reportedly describing the experience as working with a jerk who had no idea how much his approval would have meant to me. The irony wasn't lost on Ferrell or his castmates. The man, who had helped build SNL, had returned as its villain, pushing away a new generation of performers who had once dreamed of being just like him. Literally at the same time, like 1980, the same time that Kurt was scaring men in the streets of St. Louis. 9. Tina Fey. A freaking nightmare in the writer's room. If Will Ferrell experienced the shock of a hero's fall, Tina Fey endured something even more troubling: the systematic undermining of women in comedy by a man who should have been their champion. As head writer for SNL in the early 2000s, Fey encountered Chase during his increasingly rare returns to the show. What she witnessed wasn't just the difficult behavior of a fading star, but something more nasty. A pattern of sexism that revealed Chase's discomfort with women in positions of authority. "He was a freaking nightmare," Fey later told colleagues. A rare break in her typically measured public image. The kind of nightmare that makes you question whether you're overreacting, which is the worst kind. The tensions came to a head during a 2006 writer meeting when Chase repeatedly interrupted Fey, questioned her decisions, and made remarks about her appearance rather than engaging with her ideas. During a Weekend Update pitch about Dick Cheney's hunting accident, Fey proposed a line that Chase rejected as too political, then suggested nearly the identical joke 5 minutes later as his own. According to witnesses, Chase seemed particularly upset by taking direction from a woman, responding to Fey's notes with increasingly hostile pushback. It was like watching someone from the 1970s try to process that a woman was in charge. He literally couldn't compute it. Saturday Night Live staff writer. "It was uncomfortable for everyone," remembered one writer present. But Tina handled it with incredible professionalism, even as it became clear that no amount of success or authority would make him treat her as an equal. The breaking point came when Chase dismissed one of Fey's sketch concepts with a patronizing, "Honey, I was doing comedy when you were in diapers. Maybe stick to what you know." Fey, who had by then created the groundbreaking Weekend Update partnership with Amy Poehler and was developing the Emmy-winning 30 Rock, responded with characteristic restraint. But after the meeting, she reportedly approached executive producer Lorne Michaels with a simple request: "No more nostalgia bookings." The phrase became something of a code among the show's staff, a polite way of saying that Chase's behavior had crossed a line from difficult to harmful, not just to morale, but to the creative process itself. For Fey, the experience crystallized a larger truth about the challenges women in comedy faced, even at the highest levels. In her memoir, Bossy Pants, she hinted at difficult guest hosts without naming names. But those who knew her history with Chase recognized the subtext in her observation that comedy doesn't excuse everything. When asked directly about Chase in later interviews, Faye employed the diplomatic evasion mastered by women who've navigated male-dominated industries. Everyone has off days, but her actions spoke volumes. Chase never returned to SNL during her tenure as head writer, and she never worked with him on any of her subsequent projects, despite opportunities to do so. In an industry where connections are currency, Faye's quiet but firm distancing from Chase represented something significant. A new generation of comedy leaders unwilling to tolerate behavior that had once been dismissed as just Chevy being Chevy. 4 cameras, and that's it. Like he has a bunch of cameras, but you don't really notice them, and then you get like kind of 3-4 chances. 8. Donald Glover. Racism behind the community cameras. For Donald Glover, the conflict with Chevy Chase went beyond professional difficulties or personality clashes. It cut to the core of identity, revealing an ugly strain of racism that had reportedly followed Chase throughout his career, but became impossible to ignore during their time together on Community. The NBC sitcom, which began in 2009, featured Chase as Pierce Hawthorne, an out-of-touch millionaire whose casual bigotry was played for laughs. As the series progressed, the line between character and actor became increasingly blurred with Chase, allegedly making offensive comments that mirrored his character's worst traits. The situation came to a head during a scene between Chase and Glover, who played Troy Barnes. According to multiple sources, Chase grew frustrated with Glover's growing popularity and improvised comedic choices. In a moment of unscripted cruelty, Chase reportedly told Glover, "People think you're funnier because you're black." The comment delivered in front of the cast and crew created an immediate tension on set. For Glover, who would go on to create the Emmy-winning Atlanta and develop a multifaceted career as actor, writer, and musician Childish Gambino, the incident was revealing, but not entirely surprising. "I just saw Chevy as sad," Glover later told The New Yorker. "I can't help him. Nobody can help him at this point." What made the situation even more difficult was Chase's apparent inability to recognize the offensive nature of his comments. When confronted, he reportedly dismissed concerns with variations of, "It was just a joke," or, "People are too sensitive now," deflections that only deepened the rift between him and the younger cast members. While Glover handled the situation with remarkable grace, never publicly attacking Chase or allowing the tension to disrupt production, the impact was significant. Glover left Community in its 5th season to pursue other projects, a departure that many insiders connected, at least partially, to the uncomfortable dynamic with Chase. Chase, for his part, never issued a meaningful apology to Glover. When asked about their relationship in later interviews, he downplayed any tensions, claiming they got along fine and suggesting that reports of racism were exaggerated. Statements contradicted by numerous witnesses and Glover's own more measured accounts. For fans of Community, the situation created a painful irony. A show celebrated for its progressive, meta-aware approach to comedy was harboring behind-the-scenes dynamics that reflected the worst of comedy's past. As one crew member observed, Donald represented comedy's future. Chevy couldn't accept that his approach was becoming the past. That generational and cultural divide would ultimately contribute to Chase's departure from the show in its 4th season, following a pattern that had become all too familiar throughout his career. Brilliant talent undermined by behavior that alienated the very people who could have helped maintain his relevance. "Hey, I remember that night too, and I don't remember anybody twisting your arm." 7. Bill Murray. The backstage brawl heard round Hollywood. Some Hollywood feuds simmer quietly. Others erupt into the stuff of legend. The conflict between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray falls decidedly into the latter category. A clash of comedy titans that culminated in a physical altercation backstage at Saturday Night Live and established the template for Chase's difficult relationships for decades to come. The seeds were planted in SNL's first season when Murray replaced Chase after his abrupt departure for a film career. Chase had been the show's first breakout star, and Murray arrived under the shadow of comparisons and expectations. While Murray quickly established himself as a unique talent, tensions lingered, particularly when Chase would return to host, treating the cast and crew with what many described as condescension. The situation boiled over on February 18, 1978, when Chase returned to host. Throughout the week, witnesses reported increasingly hostile exchanges between the two comedians, with Chase criticizing Murray's performance and Murray responding by questioning Chase's loyalty to the show that had made him famous. Minutes before the live broadcast, the simmering tension exploded. Accounts vary slightly, but all agree that Murray confronted Chase in John Belushi's dressing room, and the exchange quickly escalated from verbal jabs to physical ones. It was like watching two different comedy philosophies go to war, recalled one crew member. Chevy was all about the polished performance, the perfect take. Murray was raw, emotional, in the moment. They represented completely different approaches to not just comedy, but life. The verbal barbs cut deep on both sides. Murray reportedly called Chase a medium talent who had abandoned SNL for money and fame. Chase countered by mocking Murray's facial acne, saying his face was so pockmarked it looked like the surface of the moon. As tensions escalated, they had to be physically separated by Belushi, no stranger to conflict himself. What made the incident so significant wasn't just the spectacle of two comedy icons trading blows, but what it revealed about Chase's relationship with the show that had launched him. In just 2 years, he had transformed from SNL family member to perceived outsider, his rapid rise to fame creating resentments that would follow him throughout his career. The feud between Chase and Murray simmered for decades, though they eventually achieved a public detente appearing together in Caddyshack 1980, with minimal interaction on screen or off. In later years, both men downplayed the incident with Murray, noting, "It's so ancient. We made peace years ago." But for those who witnessed the confrontation and its aftermath, it remained a pivotal moment in understanding Chase's complicated relationship with his peers. As one longtime SNL writer observed, that fight with Bill was symbolic. It was Chevy against everyone who stayed behind, everyone who did the weekly grind while he went off to become a movie star. And that dynamic, Chevy versus the comedy community, never really changed. The Murray-Chase brawl has become part of SNL mythology, but its significance goes beyond backstage gossip. It marked the beginning of Chase's isolation from the very comedy world he had helped define, a pattern of alienation that would repeat itself with new generations of performers for the next 40 years. Sometimes you do something in your life. If you're really lucky, that's 6. Dan Harmon, the creator versus the star. If Chase's early conflicts could be attributed to the pressures of sudden fame or the competitive environment of SNL, his later career clashes, particularly with community creator Dan Harmon, revealed a pattern that had calcified with age, an inability to adapt, to collaborate, or to acknowledge his own role in increasingly toxic professional relationships. Community. The cult NBC sitcom that began in 2009 represented both opportunity and challenge for Chase. As Pierce Hawthorne, the wealthy, bigoted member of a community college study group, Chase had his most significant role in years, a chance to introduce himself to a new generation of viewers and to demonstrate his comedic gifts in a show that was critically acclaimed for its innovative approach. Instead, the production became the site of one of Hollywood's most public meltdowns, as Chase and Harmon engaged in an escalating feud that eventually contributed to both men's departure from the series. The conflict centered on Chase's growing dissatisfaction with his character and Harmon's writing. According to cast and crew, Chase frequently complained that Pierce was becoming too mean-spirited and one-dimensional, often refusing to perform scenes as written or walking off set when frustrated. He wanted Pierce to be lovable and misunderstood, one writer recalled, but the character was written as genuinely problematic. That was the point. Chevy couldn't separate himself from the role enough to see that. For Harmon, a perfectionist writer with his own difficult reputation, Chase's pushback felt like an attack on the show's creative integrity. Their disagreements escalated from professional criticism to personal attacks, with Chase reportedly leaving angry voicemails and Harmon responding by mocking Chase during production meetings. The situation reached its nadir when Chase walked off set before finishing a scene in the Season 3 finale. That night at a wrap party, Harmon led the crew in a chant of "Fuck you, Chevy," with Chase's wife and daughter in attendance. In retaliation, Chase left Harmon a profanity-laden voicemail that Harmon then played for an audience at his Harmontown podcast recording, making their private feud very public. It was like watching two different versions of Hollywood self-destruction collide. Neither would back down, and the show became collateral damage. Community staff writer. "I don't get any laughs anymore," Chase complained in the leaked voicemail. "That's not the way I'm used to working. I've been making a living at this for 40 years. I'm just saying the laughs are up to the actor to get, and if it's not there, the actor's in trouble." The message revealed the core of Chase's frustration. A comedy legend accustomed to controlling his own image was now at the mercy of writers decades younger, creating a character that didn't showcase him in the way he preferred. For Harmon, it confirmed his view of Chase as the most ungrateful actor I've ever worked with. NBC intervened, and both men offered public apologies, but the damage was done. Chase left the show during its 4th season after Harmon had been temporarily removed as showrunner, and the feud became part of both men's public personas, referenced in interviews, dissected by fans, and analyzed as a case study in creative conflicts. Years later, Harmon offered a more nuanced perspective, acknowledging his own role in the conflict and suggesting that Chase's behavior stemmed partially from fear of irrelevance. He was coming from a place of feeling obsolete. Younger audiences knew him as the old guy from Community, not as Chevy Chase comedy legend. That fear of being forgotten, of being surpassed, of losing the status that had defined his identity for decades, helps explain, if not excuse, much of Chase's difficult behavior throughout his later career. As his star power waned, the insecurity that had always lurked beneath his confident exterior found increasingly destructive outlets. By now, you've probably noticed something chilling. Every decade, a new generation rises, and every time, Chevy finds a way to alienate them. But the names ahead, these weren't just colleagues. They were casualties. He pioneered a format and then made it impossible for anyone else to thrive in it. As we move into our top 5, the stakes get higher and the wounds cut deeper. These aren't just professional disagreements. These are the relationships that defined and ultimately destroyed a comedy legacy 4 decades in the making. And I needed to make money. What's a great way to make money? Improv. I wouldn't want to just do improv all the time. 5. Rob Huebel. One day was more than enough. Not all of Chase's difficult relationships developed over years of collaboration. Some took only hours to sour, as comedian Rob Huebel discovered during a brief but memorable encounter that confirmed Chase's reputation extended far beyond his high-profile feuds with SNL colleagues and Community castmates. Huebel, a respected comedy actor known for his work on Human Giant, Transparent, and The League, crossed paths with Chase on a short film in the mid-2000s. Despite the brevity of their interaction, it left such a negative impression that Huebel has referenced it repeatedly in interviews as his benchmark for unprofessional behavior. "He was a total dick, just mean to everyone. We all hated him," Huebel recalled on the Dumb People Town podcast. "It was crazy to meet someone you'd idolized and discover they're the worst person you've ever worked with." The situation deteriorated further during filming of a scene that required Chase to deliver a monologue seated at a desk. After multiple takes where Chase flubbed his lines, he blamed the chair, the lighting, and finally the script itself, calling it student film garbage. When the young director attempted to offer guidance, Chase stood up mid-scene and announced to the entire set, "I don't need direction from some kid who was still swimming in his father's balls when I was making Caddyshack." Everyone just froze. The makeup artist next to me whispered, "Does he realize we can all hear him?" But that was the thing. He didn't care who heard. Production assistant. The situation deteriorated further during filming, with Chase refusing to do multiple takes, dismissing direction, and making inappropriate comments about female crew members. After one particularly tense exchange about a lighting setup, Chase simply walked off set, forcing the production to restructure the day's shooting schedule. What struck Huebel wasn't just Chase's rudeness, but the casual nature of it. The sense that this behavior was so routine for Chase that he no longer recognized its impact on others. It wasn't even like he was having a bad day. Huebel noted this was clearly just how he operated. Like being awful was his default setting. For younger performers like Huebel, who had grown up watching Chase's films, these encounters created a particular kind of disillusionment. It wasn't just a disappointing interaction with a difficult colleague, but the shattering of a childhood illusion. The discovery that the man who had brought laughter to millions could be so casually cruel to those working alongside him. Perhaps, most tellingly, when Huebel shared his experience with other comedy performers, he discovered that it was far from unique. Everyone had a Chevy story, he recalled. It was like being inducted into some weird club no one wanted to join. These one-day disasters, as they became known in comedy circles, contributed significantly to Chase's isolation within the industry. Directors became reluctant to cast him. Performers declined projects where he was attached, and crews dreaded assignments to his productions. The cumulative effect was a gradual but unmistakable professional exile, not through any formal blacklisting, but through the collective decision of countless individuals who simply chose not to subject themselves to his behavior. As one casting director put it, "There are thousands of talented actors who are also kind to the crew. Why would I put everyone through a Chevy Chase experience when I don't have to? You know, not so much. It was hard. There were a few people that just out and out believed that women should not have been there." 4. Jane Curtin. Sexism on the SNL front lines. Jane Curtin's experience with Chevy Chase revealed one of the most troubling aspects of his behavior. A pattern of sexism that went beyond casual chauvinism to active undermining of female colleagues. As one of SNL's original cast members and a groundbreaking female comedian, Curtin had a front-row seat to the birth of Chase's stardom and to the problematic attitudes that accompanied it. He was bullying, sexist, and dangerous to work with. Curtin stated in a 2019 interview, breaking decades of relative silence about the early SNL environment. Not just unpleasant, but actively hostile to women who were trying to make their way in comedy. The tensions began during SNL's first season, when Chase was rapidly emerging as the show's breakout star. According to multiple accounts, he treated the show's female cast and writers differently than their male counterparts, dismissing their sketch ideas, interrupting them during meetings, and making comments about their appearance rather than their comedic abilities. For Curtin, who would go on to replace Chase at the Weekend Update desk after his departure, the behavior created a professional minefield. "You were constantly calculating," she recalled. "Do I speak up and become labeled difficult, or do I stay quiet and let it continue?" One particularly revealing incident occurred during a writer meeting when Curtin pitched a politically pointed Weekend Update joke. Chase allegedly dismissed it as too complicated for the audience before repurposing the same concept minutes later as his own idea, receiving immediate approval from the room. That was the pattern, noted a female writer from the era. When women spoke, they were ignored. When Chevy spoke, it was brilliant, even if he was just repeating what a woman had just said. The sexism extended beyond the writer room to the treatment of female production staff. Curtin observed that Chase made life miserable for anyone he viewed as beneath him, but reserved particular disdain for young women in supporting roles, subjecting them to unwanted comments about their bodies, and dismissing their professional contributions. What made Chase's behavior particularly harmful in Curtin's view was how it influenced the show's culture. As SNL's first breakout star, he set a tone that others sometimes emulated, creating an environment where casual sexism was normalized, and women had to work twice as hard to receive half the recognition. The irony was that while the show was supposedly counterculture and progressive, behind the scenes, it could feel like a boys' club from the 1950s, Curtin noted, and Chevy was the unofficial president of that club. When Chase left SNL after one season, many female cast and crew members privately celebrated. According to later accounts, his departure allowed for a recalibration of the show's internal dynamics, with performers like Curtin and Gilda Radner gaining more prominent roles and greater creative input. The most telling aspect of Curtin's assessment of Chase comes from what she didn't say for decades. As a consummate professional known for her restraint, Curtin rarely spoke negatively about colleagues, making her eventual candor about Chase all the more significant. When she finally broke her silence, colleagues from that era confirmed her account, suggesting that her experience was not isolated, but representative. For a show that helped define modern comedy and launched countless careers, the Chase-Curtin dynamic represents a sobering reminder of comedy's complicated history with gender equality, and how even groundbreaking productions could harbor regressive attitudes behind the scenes. Old lizard and a common house cat. Wait, 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 wait. Then it changes back into a smaller kangaroo. 3. John Belushi. The rivalry that shaped SNL. The tension between John Belushi and Chevy Chase represented more than just a personality clash. It was a fundamental conflict over comedy's soul playing out behind the scenes of television's most influential show. Their rivalry, which began during SNL's first season and continued until Belushi's death in 1982, revealed the deep insecurities beneath Chase's confident exterior and established patterns that would define his relationships for decades to come. From the beginning, Belushi and Chase embodied different comedic approaches. Chase was polished, camera-ready, and verbally nimble, while Belushi channeled a raw physical comedy that seemed to emerge from his very being. Their contrasting styles created natural competition, but the situation intensified as Chase rapidly emerged as the show's breakout star. John hated how much attention Chevy got, recalled Dan Aykroyd, who was close to both men. And Chevy resented that John was seen as the authentic voice of the counterculture while he was viewed as more mainstream. The rivalry manifested in ways both subtle and overt. During table reads, they would compete for punchlines, often talking over each other. In production meetings, they advocated for competing sketch ideas. On air, they sometimes seemed to be performing not just for the audience, but against each other, each trying to steal scenes and command attention. What transformed their professional competition into personal animosity was Chase's eventual decision to leave SNL after just one season, departing for a film career while the show was still finding its footing. To Belushi and others who remained, this felt like a betrayal, abandoning the ensemble that had created his stardom for individual glory. "You're not just leaving a job," Belushi reportedly told Chase. "You're leaving us all hanging." Chase's response, "I've got to look out for myself," crystallized the fundamental difference in how they viewed their work and their relationships. The tension escalated when Chase would return to host, treating his former colleagues with what many described as condescension. During one infamous hosting stint, Chase insisted on performing a sketch idea that had been rejected, overruling Belushi's objections. When the sketch bombed with the audience, Chase blamed the execution rather than the concept, creating lasting resentment. Their conflict became so well known within comedy circles that it affected the dynamics of projects like Caddyshack, where director Harold Ramis deliberately scheduled their scenes separately to avoid on-set tensions. Even in social settings, friends reported having to carefully manage invitations to avoid having both men at the same event. What made their rivalry particularly poignant was that beneath the professional jealousy lay a complex admiration. Belushi respected Chase's precision and verbal dexterity. Chase envied Belushi's authenticity and countercultural credibility. In a different environment, they might have balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses. Instead, they became locked in a competition that neither could win. When Belushi died of a drug overdose in 1982, Chase was among those devastated by the loss. At the funeral, he was visibly emotional, leading some to believe that their feud had been exaggerated. But those closest to both men knew better. Their conflict had been real and significant, even if complicated by mutual respect. For Chase, the rivalry with Belushi established a pattern that would repeat throughout his career: an inability to fully integrate into ensembles, a tendency to prioritize individual success over collective creation, and a defensiveness that transformed professional differences into personal vendettas. As one SNL writer from that era observed, watching Chevy with John was like seeing the template for how he would interact with performers for the next 40 years. The insecurity, the competitiveness, the need to be the center of attention, it was all there from the beginning. Great to be in New York. Great to be at Saturday Night Live. It's great to be here the day after Halloween. 2. Chris Rock. Racism. From the first hello. Chris Rock's encounter with Chevy Chase represents one of the most disturbing chapters in SNL's history. A moment when casual racism from a comedy legend left an indelible mark on a young performer who would go on to become one of the most significant comedic voices of his generation. The incident occurred during the 1992-93 season of SNL, when Rock was a cast member and Chase returned to host. For Rock, who had grown up watching Chase's films and SNL performances, the opportunity to work with a comedy icon should have been a career highlight. Instead, it became what Rock would later describe as the rudest I've ever been treated in my career. According to multiple sources, including Rock himself, the tension began almost immediately upon Chase's arrival. During their first interaction, Chase allegedly made a racially insensitive comment that shocked everyone within earshot. While accounts vary on the exact wording, Rock has confirmed that the remark came within minutes of meeting him and was unmistakably racial in nature. "It wasn't even a joke," Rock later recalled. "There was no punchline. It was just racism." For Rock, then in his 20s and still establishing himself at SNL, the encounter created an impossible situation. Confronting Chase directly could have labeled him as difficult at a crucial career juncture, while remaining silent meant tacitly accepting treatment that undermined his dignity. The situation deteriorated throughout the week as Chase continued to make uncomfortable comments during rehearsals. According to cast members present, Chase seemed particularly bothered by Rock's growing prominence in the comedy world, making dismissive remarks about his stand-up style and questioning whether his material was too urban for mainstream audiences. What made the situation even more disturbing was the lack of intervention from show leadership. Though several senior cast members and writers expressed concerns about Chase's behavior, no formal action was taken, a failure that reflected the show's complicated history with issues of race and its tendency to protect established stars at the expense of newer talent. For Rock, the experience became formative, teaching him harsh lessons about power dynamics in Hollywood and the additional burdens faced by performers of color. "You learn quickly who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't," he noted years later. The fallout was significant. After that episode, Chase was not invited back to host for several seasons, a rare consequence for a founding cast member. For Rock, the incident contributed to his growing disillusionment with SNL, where he often felt his talents were underutilized. He would leave the show in 1993 to pursue projects that offered him greater creative control. In subsequent years, As Rock's star rose and Chase's waned, the power dynamic between them shifted dramatically. Rock became one of comedy's most respected voices, known for his incisive commentary on race and society, while Chase increasingly struggled to maintain relevance in an evolving comedy landscape. When asked about Chase in later interviews, Rock has generally shown remarkable restraint, acknowledging the incident without dwelling on it. "I don't think Chevy is an evil person," he said in one interview, "but he comes from a different time and he never seemed interested in changing with the times." That assessment of Chase as a performer unable or unwilling to evolve as cultural attitudes shifted helps explain his increasing isolation within the comedy community, as younger generations of performers embraced more progressive values and collaborative approaches. Chase remained entrenched in attitudes and behaviors that had become not just offensive, but professionally untenable. For many in the industry, Rock's experience with Chase symbolizes a broader changing of the guard in American comedy, a shift from an era where racial insensitivity was often overlooked to one where such behavior carries real professional consequences regardless of star power. Leonard Bernstein concerts were just lovely. Now, if they only show V1 Gilda Radner, the cruelty behind closed doors. And then there's Gilda. No yelling, no backstabbing, just the slow, silent erosion of a gentle soul. Of all the troubled relationships in Chevy Chase's career, perhaps none reveals more about his character than his treatment of Gilda Radner, the beloved SNL original cast member whose groundbreaking comedy was often overshadowed by Chase's spotlight during the show's early years. On screen, Chase and Radner appeared to share the easy chemistry of comedy colleagues performing together in numerous sketches during SNL's first season. Off-camera, however, a very different dynamic was at play, one that multiple cast and crew members have described as deeply troubling. "Gilda was the heart of the show," remembered one early SNL writer. "She brought a vulnerability and authenticity to her comedy that was revolutionary for women at that time, and Chevy seemed to resent her for it, particularly when audiences responded to her characters with as much enthusiasm as they did to his." Weekend update. The tension manifested in writer meetings where Chase would frequently interrupt Radner's pitches or dismiss her ideas. During rehearsals, he would make last-minute changes to sketches they shared, often minimizing her role or altering her punchlines without consultation. In a now infamous 1975 sketch called Slumber Party, Radner